There we go, guys. So now we're ready to jump onto the render stage. And again, as I mentioned, I feel like this is such a good first model for anyone learning 3D that it really deserves to have a nice render so that you can show it off to your friends and make sure that you tell people that you are learning 3D. So here's a couple of things that we're going to do. First of all, let's just rename a couple of elements. So for instance, this rings and this rings, I'm just going to control J to join them. Control J, there we go. And this one, we're going to call them rivets. So this is going to be my rings, the barrel, and the rivets. And one thing that we can do here, of course, we could combine all of the elements, but another thing that we can do is we can create a little collection. And collections are a way in which we can like hide or show all of the elements at the same time. The only thing I don't like about collections is that they do not have a transform node. So these are just a way to organize elements, but it's not really a way to connect things. Okay, so I'm going to grab the barrel, the rings, and the rivets, and I'm going to hit M. I'm going to create a new collection. I'm going to call this collection barrel collection. And hit OK. So now, if at any point I want to turn off the barrel, I just click on that collection and the whole thing goes away. Now, if I want to move the barrel while still keeping all of the other things together, one of the things that I need to do is I need to parent the rings and the rivets to the barrel. The way to do that is we select the rings and then we select the barrel and we hit P. Or Shift P. Control P. Oh my god. Control P. There we go. Control P. So we're going to set the parent to object. There we go. Now we're going to grab the rivets. We're going to grab the barrel. And I'm also going to say Control P to object. And what this does, as you can see right here, it creates a new hierarchy on our outliner that allows me to have the rings and the rivets be a part of the barrel. So if I select the barrel and I move it, every single place where I move the barrel, everything else is going to follow. Now, I just need to go to number one. Let's bring this just bring this down. Doesn't matter if it's not on the center anymore. We just want to have it right around there. And we're going to create a nice little scene for our barrel. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to create mesh and a plane. Let's make this plane a little bit bigger. There we go. I'm going to go to object mode, select this edge right here, and I'm going to extrude this on Z. So I'm going to extrude this up. Then this edge right there, I'm going to go Control B, which is bevel, and we're going to bevel this like that. And let's add a couple of segments to make this a round effect. This is called an infinite background. It's just a backdrop for our character or for our subject, in this case the barrel. And if we shade this as smooth and give it a subdivision modifier right here, what this will give us is a very, very nice effect. I'm going to give it 2 subdivision modifiers. There we go. Now we're going to jump onto the camera. Remember, you can press the number 0 on your number pad to jump into the camera, and we can press the letter N to make sure that on the view we got camera to view so that we can move normally. Again, this is my preferred method to do it. There are other ways, but I really like to do it this way. And we can get this right there. I'm going to scale the infinite plane a little bit so that we don't see the edges of the object, and we're going to center our very nice barrel right there. Another thing you can do is we can Shift D and duplicate the barrel. Now, if you want to duplicate the whole thing, of course, you need to select all of the elements. But if you Shift D, you can have multiple barrels. So that's another option for you, my friends. Now, in this case, I don't want to do that. Let's delete all of this, guys. There we go. We're just going to keep this one right here. Now, let's talk about rendering. As we saw before, if we press the letter C and go into render mode, we're going to be able to see how light interacts with the different elements. However, I'm going to explain to you some very important things here before we actually do the render. The render setup is going to be found right here. This is the render engine that we're going to be using. Right now it's set to Eevee. We're actually going to be changing that. And over here we have the render format. Now, usually nowadays for social media, a square format is preferred. So I'm going to go for a 2048 by 2048. There we go. So it's going to be a square format. And this will allow me, as you can see right here, to, of course, zoom in a little bit more. Let's go to our camera right here. There we go. We can also use this one right here. We can find a very nice, a very nice setup right around there. I think that looks good. I'll try to make this a little bit more symmetrical, something like that. Perfect. So this, again, this is the format of the image that we're going to be doing. Over here, it's also the format of the image. Right now, it's a PNG. Perfectly fine. Later on, we'll talk about animation, but for now, this should be more than enough. Now, about render engines. So render engines are kind of like the processing power that are going to give you the final image or the final result. Eevee is a real-time processing engine that looks or will give you results a little bit closer to what you would expect in games. And the other one, which is Cycles, is going to give you results that you would probably expect with films or commercials. So it has more power, more potency. It will analyze your image a little bit better, and it will give you a lot like nicer results. So I'm going to start with Eevee just to show you how it looks, and then we're going to switch to Cycles. But one thing about Cycles, if you go to Edit, Preferences, and you go to the System Preferences, if you are a proud owner of an NVIDIA GPU, you can actually use the CUDA cores of your NVIDIA GPU, and you can use your GPU to render, which is a really cool way to do faster renders. GPU rendering is like the new thing nowadays. Everyone is doing it because it's very, very fast. It's not as precise as CPU rendering, especially for things like glass, water, and things like that. But for this element right here, it's going to be super, super fast. So I personally am using CUDA, and I'm using an RTX 3080 Ti right here. So now, if we go, let's jump outside of the camera. I'm going to right click on the very border right here. I'm going to do something called a vertical split. This vertical split will allow me to have two scenes, and I can move the scenes independently. So in this scene, for instance, I can turn on my camera and I can go into render mode. And in this scene right here, I can stay in just solid mode and see this right here. I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to add a light right here. And I'm going to add a point light. I'm going to bring this point light like right around there. And then with G and C, I'm going to bring it up. And let's bring it a little bit forward, right around there. Now, if we go to the properties of the light, I can change the power of this light to something like 2000. I know it seems like a lot, but we really want to have a lot of light here on the scene. 2000, yeah, might be a little bit too much, but if we start moving this, as you can see, it will physically react and we'll get a very, very nice effect. Another thing we can do is we can change the radius, and the radius is really helpful to change the softness of the shadow. Look at that. Very nice, soft shadow. Let's bring this down to 1500, or maybe like 1000. There we go. That's a little bit better. Another thing we can do is we can change the value. So I'm going to go for a little bit of a warm value right here. So something like that. There we go. So as you can see, we are getting a nice result. And this render that you're seeing right now, this is Eevee. This is like real-time rendering that's perfectly valid, and you can use this for your like interactions or for your renders. However, if we go to this little thing right here and we change to Cycles, we're talking. I'm going to change the device to GPU. Sorry if my voice cut off a little bit there, because when I'm recording, the CPU of course gets a little bit overloaded. That's why I also like using GPU. And as you can see, look at how more realistic and precise this result is thanks to the GPU and the Cycles option. I will be using Cycles pretty much throughout this whole course. However, again, I'm not saying that Eevee is wrong. I just always feel that you can get even like better results with Cycles. So yeah, this is it. And the cool thing is right now we are seeing the render in the viewport. So any change we do right here will be reflected. And thanks to, again, to the GPU technology, we can get some really, really nice effects. So I'm going to go with like a side light right here. And I'm probably going to bring the intensity down a little bit more. Let's do something like 700. There we go. Probably a little bit too low. Let's go 800. There we go. I do want to have a little bit of a high white right there. Now, I'm going to go to this little option. This is the environment or the world options, the world properties of Blender. And as you can see, the color of the background is set to this like darkish gray. This is influencing the way we see our scene. It's actually like getting some information into the scene. So I'm going to get this out. I'm just going to go all the way to the black. And as you can see, right now we have harsher and more stronger shadows. Now, I'm going to grab this light right here. I'm going to press Shift D, and I'm going to move it to the other side. This is what we call a fill light, and this fill light will let me have less intense shadows. So just one, there we go. So this one, of course, needs to be at least like half the amount of the other one. So I'm going to go to 400 so that we can still see some of the shadow. We can also move it down or just like move it a little bit out of the way, something like that, I think. I'm actually think I'm going to go even lower to like 100 watts. There we go, because I still want to see a little bit of shadow, but you can see the difference without that point light, and with this point light, we do get like a softer, like a bounce light back. I'm going to change the color as well. I'm going to make this a little bit blue. That way we get a nice little contrast right here. And finally, we're going to use a spotlight to generate something called a rim light. A rim light is when we hit the border of the back part of the character, and we separate our character, or in this case, our barrel, from the back side of our scene. So I'm going to press a Shift and the A. I'm going to add a new light, and this is going to be a spotlight. I'm going to bring the spotlight up, and with this little yellow thing, I'm going to point it towards the barrel right there. Let's increase the intensity. Let's go for 200. Let's go for 400. Let's go for 2000. There we go. Now we start seeing the little bit of rim light right there. We can change the angle of this thing. So I'm gonna like really change the angle right there. But I'm gonna increase the radius to make it really soft. And as you can see, this is gonna give you some very nice effects right there. I'm gonna bring this like to 8,000. Like, don't be scared to play around and push your values like really high if you need to, because this is how we experiment and we find things that will work or might not work. In this case, 6,000 I think is gonna be a good number. And there we go. Look at how nice this like scene is starting to look. Now, this is of course not gonna be my final render. We're gonna be doing some more things in just a second. But this is giving us a very nice result so far. I'm gonna save real quick. Control S. By the way, all of these files are gonna be available for you, my friends. So I'm gonna save this real quick, and I'm gonna start playing a little bit with materials. We're gonna do something called a clay render, and a clay render will allow us to see the object with a little bit more, you know, juice to it. So I'm gonna go to the plane right here, and if we go to the material options, I'm gonna create a new material. I'm gonna call this material floor. That way we can control how we want this floor to look. What if we go for like a dark color here? So we're gonna make the floor a lot darker, and that way, as you can see, our barrel is gonna get a lot more spotlight, right? It's gonna be the center of our scene, the main character in our render right here. Now we can change the properties of the floor, but right now I think I'm gonna keep them like this. We can change, for instance, the roughness, which is how shiny or not the floor is. But I think if we bring the roughness down to make it more reflective, it gets a little bit distracting because we're seeing the reflections of the light. So I'm gonna keep the roughness up, so it's a very like matted floor. We can even bring this a little bit lower, and that's gonna give us again a more interesting frame on the barrel itself. Now I'm gonna grab the barrel, not the rings or the rivets, just the barrel. I'm gonna add a new material, and on the base color, I'm gonna grab this sort of like nice warm color. Let's bring the value or the saturation down, and there we go. As you can see, we get this nice cartoony clay looking like a render for the what's the word, for the wood. We can of course bring the roughness down. It's gonna make the wood a little bit shinier, and especially you can see there on the borders where we created the little like plates, we're gonna be getting a very nice effect. So I think something like that should be fine. Just a little bit of wet for our wood. Then we're gonna grab the rings and we're gonna add a new material, and for the rings we're gonna call this metal. And what we're going to do is very simple. We're just going to select the metallic properties and bring it all the way to the top. And as you can see, we're already getting some metallic effect. If we bring the roughness down, the metal is going to be reflecting the environment a little bit more. But since we don't really have an environment right now, everything's black. As you can see, we get this sort of result. For the rivets, we don't need to create a new material. We just click right here and we select the metal material, and that's it. Let's go to the wood material and just call this a wood. And there we go. By doing this, as you can see, we've successfully created a very simple, but again, a lot more presentable render. Like, I hate when students are doing their work and they just like grab a screenshot from their computer and it's like, hey, look, I modeled the barrel. Look at this. With just 10-15 minutes that we've been working on the render, a couple of very easy lights and some materials, and this render already looks way more presentable. I'm not saying this is a portfolio piece whatsoever, like this is still just a very simple exercise, but this is a perfect exercise again to keep on your documents and remind yourself after you finish the course, like, wow, I can't believe I started here and then I went all the way to the final result that we're seeing on the thumbnail. So yeah, now the final thing that we need to do is just set up our render. I'm gonna go to the render options right here, and I'm gonna set a time limit for my render of 30 seconds. I just want the render to be a little bit fast. If you want it to be more precise, you can increase the time, but to be honest, in this particular case, 30 seconds should be more than enough. So I'm gonna go to render, and I'm just gonna say render image. You can also use F12 as the shortcut. Now, this is what's gonna happen right here. This is a new window. This is the render view. And here we're gonna see the render happening. As you can see, I'm already detecting some issues. For instance, the rivets, they do not have the shades smooth, therefore they're looking a little bit weird. So I'm gonna stop the render by clicking on that X button, grab the rivets, right click, shade smooth. And then we're gonna render and render again. And there we go. So the more time we give the render, the cleaner all of the samples start to look. You can see the more time passes, the more resolved all of these areas are. However, there's a very cool thing at the very end of the render, and I wanna be like read this so that you guys can appreciate it. There's an automatic denoiser. Look at that. It just happened. As you saw that right there, the automatic denoiser just cleaned my whole image and it's giving me this super perfect render of this like super cartoon barrel. So the denoiser is an option that's on by default right here on the render, as you can see, and it's using right now the open image denoise, which is really cool and really accurate as well. And yeah, it's giving us a very nice result here on our barrel. So once you're happy with the render, once you like properly place your lights and you're happy with the composition and the result, the last thing you need to do is just go here to image and save this image as your render. I'm gonna save this as my barrel render. And I mean, come on, we started with a very simple D6 and now we are all the way to this barrel. Like this was the first render that we did probably like an hour ago in terms of recording. And now, after just learning a little bit more about how render or Blender works, we're able to get to this point. In the next chapter, my friends, we're going to start with the project. We're going to start with the axe, and we're going to be going over like more professional pipelines and tools that you need in order to get to the final result. Again, if you still feel a little bit like I don't want to say slow, but if you feel a little bit challenged by the software, try to practice by doing some simple props. My recommendation would be to try and do like a traffic cone, try to do again like a metal barrel, try to do like a soda can or like a trash can even, like simple objects that you know you can utilize the tools that we just learned, such as bevel, extrude, inset, loop cut, all of these ones, so that you feel a little bit more comfortable with the software. And once you're ready, well, I will wait for you on chapter 1 when we can start working on this amazing axe. So hang on tight and I'll see you back on the next one.